Acting Deputy President. I'm really pleased to be rising to speak on this bill today, and the Greens' opposition, total, complete opposition to the prospect of giving over $60 billion in tax cuts to the big end of town, to big business. We have a choice, and this bill is a stark statement of the choice that we have in this parliament. We have a choice. We can either give a handout, $65 billion handout to big business, or we can have that $65 billion to spend. We have a choice. We can be working to build a more egalitarian, more equal society, or we can be increasing the inequality in our society by increasing the profits to big business and not having the money to be spending on the services, to be spending on parts of Australian society that are desperately in need of investment. I mean, the core things that are concerns, that are problems in Australian society today, it isn't that big business isn't investing because they think their tax levels are too high. It's not that they are taking their money elsewhere because of the siren call of lower taxes, which is basically the core element of the government's reasoning as to why we need these tax cuts, because if we don't have tax cuts, well, businesses are going to take their money and invest elsewhere. It's not that that's what's going on. Basically, we know that there is absolutely zero evidence that by giving businesses that $65 billion in tax cuts, that's going to mean that there is more investment here, and there is absolutely zero evidence that by giving big business $65 billion in tax cuts, that it's somehow going to trickle down and improve conditions and improve wages for ordinary Australian workers. The trickle-down effect, we've been waiting for it for a very long time. But that's the core of the government's argument, that you give tax cuts to big business and somehow eventually that the benefits are going to trickle down and reach the conditions for ordinary workers and life is going to improve. That's right. It just doesn't happen. We have had over 30 years of neoliberal economics in every country where this has been pursued. Basically, ordinary workers are waiting there, waiting for the small drops to start. Watching them, in fact, watching instead the benefits trickle up. Watching instead that things being taken away from workers and being put into the pockets of the big end of town. But we know, in fact, what will improve conditions for business and as well improve conditions for ordinary Australian people, which will be good for our society overall, and that's investment. It's investment in infrastructure that can cope with our growing population. It's investment in a skilled workforce, investing in our schools, in our TAFE sector, in our university. It's investment in quality social services. And they are the things that if you ask ordinary Australians what needs to change in Australian society, it's not that, oh, well, we reckon that big business need to be having a bit more money in their pockets. No, it's saying they want to see decent schools. They don't want to see the rundown schools that are in the suburbs of Australian cities and our towns around the country. They don't want to see overcrowded schools that are being built in growth areas because we are not keeping up with the investment that's required to be educating our growing population. They want to see the end of homelessness. They think back to 20 years ago when we did not have people homeless on the streets of our cities. When I was a young adult, you walked through the streets of Melbourne, you did not see people struggling, not able to afford to have a place to live. These are the choices that we can be making. We can be investing in public housing. We can be investing in social housing. We can be dealing with the issues of homelessness and creating a situation where everybody in Australia has got the chance to thrive. We know what's going to be helping business. It means that their workers can actually get to work and know that their their children are being well cared for in quality childcare services, not to have to struggle and have waiting lists that are months and months long, so that women can't return to work because they can't get a childcare space. We know that businesses need a skilled workforce. We know that we've got a desperate skill shortage in some areas of our economy, which is why we're saying, oh well, we need to bring in nurses from the Philippines because we are not training enough here in Australia. That we need to be bringing in other skilled workers because we are not training enough in Australia, because our technical and vocational education system has been stripped to the bone. It is no longer providing the services that it needs to do. This is where we need to have investment in Australia. And we know that we have got working poor. That's, again, a change in the time of my adult life, where at least it used to be that if you had a job that you could afford to live, you could afford to feed your kids, you could afford to put food on the table, put shoes on the feet of your children. But now we know that in order to be able to survive so many people in a casualised, contracted-out workforce, they've got to be working 2 jobs, they've got to be working 3 jobs, and even then are only struggling to gather the money together in order to be able to sort of keep home and hearth together. So these, we need to be dealing, if we want to be increasing wages, you don't do it by having the trickle-down effect of hoping that a corporate tax cut is somehow going to then mean that we're going to be increasing wages. There are many other ways that we can be increasing wages. We can be investing in infrastructure and other services, and we can be making sure that we guarantee an increase in wages, whether it's in the public service or in the private sector, of increasing the amount of money that people are being paid. And we can be investing in all sorts of other services that are actually much, much more efficient at both creating jobs and creating economic activity in Australia, rather than just this wish, this hope and a prayer that if you give away $65 billion to the big end of town, that is going to improve conditions here. I mean, this really does go to the heart of the sort of Australia that we want to have. It also goes to the heart of our democracy, as to whether the choice that people have, and whether it's the votes of ordinary people and what they want to see have happen is what holds sway, or whether it's because of the continued push from large companies that they get what they want. On the base, and then it's tried. The government tries to sell it to the community, to say, well, if we invest in big business, that it's going to have benefits to you, but without any guarantee that that's going to happen. We know there is no connection between a company tax cut and with wages. I mean, we know, in fact, that company executives get bonuses that are based on cutting wages and worker numbers from putting up wages. I mean, we've even seen ads from the Australian Bankers Association saying that on behalf of the ads that 80% of their profits go to shareholders, in which case you increase their profits, it's highly unlikely that workers are going to see a cent of it. So, and if we are really concerned about wages, a much better way of increasing wages is in fact going to be to guarantee a wage increase in the public service, rather than having wages flatlining and, as I said, going backwards because of the casualisation and contracting out. If we had a public sector wage rise, that would then force the private sector to follow. And the Greens have put forward a policy to increase public sector wages across the board for non-executive workers by 4% a year for the next 5 years. And then the other area that, in terms of increasing productivity, increasing the overall benefits to society, and improving the conditions that businesses need to thrive in Australia, is investing in infrastructure. If you look at what the costs of congestion in our growing cities are, it is massive. And that's what I hear companies talking about, saying, let's get our cities working properly. Why isn't our government investing in the sort of infrastructure that we need so that we can have efficient transport, so that it means that their workers don't have to be stuck in traffic for 4 hours a day, So it means that people can actually get to work fresh, that they can, that their transport system is working well for them to be able to get their goods around town. And there's only one way that we know that we can be improving the infrastructure in our cities today, and that's to be investing in substantial public transport, because that is the only way that you can be shifting the huge volumes of people to be getting to work around our cities today. So I think of it as saying, OK, if you've got $65 billion to spend, what would you spend that on? Do you give it to big business to maybe trickle down to workers, maybe it would mean that they get a tiny bit more investment in Australia? Or would you spend that $65 billion actually investing in the infrastructure that would mean that we could be dealing with our congestion problems in our city today? The Melbourne Metro, underground metro system that's now being built in Melbourne, that's coming at a price tag of about $10 billion. But we know that that is only not even going to be sort of touching the sides of what's needed in terms of investment in public transport in Melbourne. There are already plans on the board for Melbourne Metro 2, which would again is just what's needed to keep up with the growth of population in Melbourne. That's what we should be saying. Yes, federal government money supported by state government money going into those public transport services. I expect Melbourne Metro 2 is probably another $10 billion that's required, but it's absolutely needed. We could be spending the billions of dollars on tax cuts, or we could be spending it on infrastructure that is actually going to transform our cities. It is actually going to mean that we have cities that work. Otherwise, we are going to get 10, 15, 20 years down the track with our growing population, and our cities will be at an absolute standstill. That's what's going to be causing businesses to flee. We know the reason why companies like investing in Australia at the moment, because our cities basically do work, because we have got the stability, because we've got the social networks that mean that we have well-functioning cities. But you end up with the level of dysfunction through massive population growth that's not being catered for by that investment in infrastructure. And that's the sort of thing that's going to turn companies away and say, no, I'm not going to build my new facility here in Melbourne or Sydney because it's just not working, because the workers can't get to it, because we're going to be stuck in congestion, because our goods are going to be stuck on tollways for a couple of hours in order to get somewhere. We could be investing in high-speed rail. If we want to work out how we're going to deal with our growing population, that's the sort of infrastructure investment we need. And we're told that, no, that's unaffordable, it's too much. It is affordable. We have a choice. We can be investing in that sort of city-shaping, country-shaping infrastructure, or we could be frittering money away by giving tens of billions, $65 billion in tax cuts to big businesses, which is going to have very, very little impact on the overall direction of our society. So the Greens are absolutely firm that this is the wrong way to be going. We have been clear throughout. It's basically philosophically for the Greens. We know that what needs to be happening is we need to be reducing inequality in our society. We need to be improving the services, improving the infrastructure, reducing inequality, not giving away tax cuts that are just going to be increasing that inequality. The Labor Party has been all over the place. At the moment they're saying they're against these tax cuts, but as the government's been saying and others have been very clear, they don't know where they're at. We've got the Treasurer, Chris Bowen, who's been quoted many times in this debate, but I think it is worth re-quoting him to say that he actually thinks that corporate tax cuts in the long term or over time are a good thing, that now is not the time to be doing it. Even in his recent book, he said the nation should be aiming for a 25% corporate tax rate. So it's very unclear as to where the Labor Party lie.
Senator Rice, could you just resume your seat, please? Senator Wilson on a point of order.
Point of order, Chair. There's a number of consistent interjections in the chamber. Could I draw your attention to other senators making interjections while Senator Rice is speaking?
Senator Whish-Wilson, as you know, this can be a lively chamber at times. I have heard some conversations, very few. You have no point of order. Senator Rice, you do have the chair.
Thanks, Mr. Acting Deputy President. It's all right. I can cope with it. Yes, it does make it rather sort of unparliamentary, I think. But look, I look forward to the Labor Party staying firm on this, and I look forward to the Labor Party actually saying that corporate tax cuts are not the way to go, because that is the direction that we need to be heading in. And it would be extremely disappointing if at some time down the track with a Labor government that suddenly they also fall into this myth that corporate tax cuts are going to be good for Australia, good for our economy, good for our society. Because it's very clear, if you look at countries around the world that are the places that people really want to live, that rate the highest in terms of satisfaction and happiness, it's not the areas that have got low corporate tax rates. So, and then we've got, the others in the crossbench who I think it's very sad have been seemingly bought off, given a few bits of silver for their pet project, and suddenly they are all over corporate tax cuts. One nation who say that they are there for the battler, and the benefits of these corporate tax cuts to the battler are next to zero, and yet they have been. We don't know what the deal that's been done. This isn't democracy at work. This is just playing various people off, offering them bits that they accept, rather than sort of fundamentally saying what's in the interest of Australia. And it's exactly like when Senator Hanson backed the $313 million income tax cuts for the richest Australian dollars. Look, it's very clear. Going down this direction, we have a choice. Going down the direction of these corporate tax cuts is not the direction that Australia needs to be heading in. If we want to have a society that's functioning well, that is working well, that is reducing inequality, that if we want to have a society where our democracy is, and that what's in the interests of ordinary people is what holds sway, then going in the direction of corporate tax cuts is not to go. We have a choice here in this parliament today, and I urge the crossbench and certainly to join the Greens in speaking out loudly and voting against this direction of increasing inequality in society. We've got a choice here. We can knock back these corporate tax cuts, and then we can move on towards creating a more equal, more caring, more sustainable economy and society for Australia.